It's a Western about a territorial prison in Arizona. And it's the story of how these 6 people get together and end up in this jail.
It was supposed to be a clever Western, witty, ironic, and darkly funny. But one moment nearly pushed it into a scandal. In 1970, there was a crooked man brought together legends like Kirk and Henry Fonda. But all Hollywood could talk about afterward wasn't the story, the cast, or even the twist ending. It was Barbara Rhoades. One scene was filmed, whispered about, and then erased from existence. Why did Warner Brothers bury it? What really happened on that desert set? And how close did this film come to breaking every rule in old Hollywood? The Crooked Man rides in. By the time There Was a Crooked Man hit theaters in December 1970, the golden age of the Western was dying. The clean-cut cowboy was out, the anti-hero was in, and America itself was changing. The late 1960s had brought social unrest, anti-war protests, and a deep skepticism toward authority. It was the perfect backdrop for a film that wanted to challenge every myth the West had ever sold. Into that uneasy moment rode Joseph L. Mankiewicz, a director better known for sharp-witted dramas like All About Eve and The Barefoot Contessa, now taking his only ride into the frontier. But this was no typical Western. It was a cynical, darkly funny meditation on greed, corruption, and the crookedness of men. The film opens with a bang, literally, as Kirk Douglas's character, Paris Pittman Jr., pulls off a daring $500,000 heist, double-crosses his partners, and hides the loot in a pit crawling with rattlesnakes. It's the kind of ruthless, self-serving act that sets the tone for everything that follows. Pittman is charming, confident, and unapologetically corrupt. The kind of man who could talk you into your own downfall and make you thank him for it. Douglas played him with a sly grin and twinkling menace, reminding audiences that charisma and cruelty often come hand in hand. But every crooked man needs his opposite, or at least someone who thinks he's the opposite. Enter Henry Fonda as Woodward Lopeman, a former sheriff turned prison warden who believes in the power of reform. Lopeman is idealistic to a fault, convinced that he can bring morality and order to a place built on punishment and deceit. From the moment he meets Pittman, their relationship becomes a chess match, the outlaw testing every weakness, the warden trying to believe that virtue can survive in a world of thieves. A cast of brilliantly drawn outlaws and misfits surrounds them. The Missouri Kid, played by Burgess Meredith, is a legendary old bandit who's too stubborn and too proud to let age stop him from stirring up trouble. Hume Cronin and John Randolph are a bickering pair of lifelong con men whose love-hate relationship adds absurd humor to the bleakness. And then there is Warren Oates, whose unpredictable energy brings the prison yard to life. Each character has shortcomings, yet they are all very likable in a way, just like the main idea of the film. Everyone's crooked, some just conceal it better. The film's setting, a desert penitentiary in the 1880s, almost became a character itself. The prison, which was built from scratch in California's Joshua Tree National Park, took 7 tiring weeks to complete. Crews faced extremely hot days and very cold nights, as well as the occasional desert snow. However, that rawness is what gave the film its authenticity. The audience could feel the grit, smell the dust, and taste the desperation of men who were not only behind bars, but also in their own greed. Mankiewicz's narrative, unlike most Westerns, did not glorify heroism or redemption. It ripped them apart. Pittman was not the villain to be hissed at. He was the one who was even admired, while his cruelty spread among, and finally took his own life. And Fonda's Lopeman, the so-called moral center, ends up compromising himself by the end, thus showing that righteousness is just another mask people wear until the stakes get high enough. It was a Western that turned inside out, elegant, ironic, and a little ahead of its time. But there was a lot more going on in the film than just its sharp writing, great acting, and dark humor. There was a crooked man would soon become an entirely different thing in the public memory. The film was built on lies, greed, and deception, but nothing in it would be as controversial as the one moment that Warner Bros. Decided the world wasn't ready to see. A Western turned inside out. When audiences sat down to watch There Was a Crooked Man, they expected guns, grit, and gallantry, the usual moral tug-of-war that every Western promised. What they got instead was something far more cynical and subversive. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz didn't just twist the Western formula, he dissected it. This wasn't a story about cowboys and justice, it was about hypocrisy, greed, and the delusion that anyone in the West, or anywhere, was truly innocent. By 1970, the Western was in decline. The genre that once defined American cinema was now being pulled apart by filmmakers who grew up questioning the myths it had built. The age of John Wayne's noble gunslinger was over. Audiences were now drawn to morally ambiguous characters like Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name or Paul Newman's Butch Cassidy. Mankiewicz stepped into this shifting landscape with the precision of a surgeon. He had never directed a Western before, but he knew exactly what he wanted to do: strip away the romance and expose the rot underneath. The result was a story that felt both familiar and deeply unsettling. There Was a Crooked Man looked like a Western. Dusty landscapes, prison gangs, whiskey-soaked saloons, but its tone was pure irony. Mankiewicz filled the script with cutting humor, biting exchanges, and moments that bordered on absurd. In one scene, a bartender pours spilled liquor back into the bottle to save a few drops. In another, a prisoner proudly claims he hasn't changed his underwear in 35 years. The battle between Paris Pittman Jr. and Woodward Lopeman, two characters who represented opposite ends of what was supposedly a non-existent moral spectrum, was the success of the story. Pittman, with the performance of Kirk Douglas, was the personification of charm with no conscience. He could talk his way out of every situation, play people how he wanted, and still you liked him. Henry Fonda's Lopeman, on the other hand, was the dreamer, the man who still had faith in fairness, order, and justice. However, by the end of the story, the distinction between them was no longer sharp. The so-called reformer was found to be not so pure after all. That moral decline was precisely what made There Was a Crooked Man so daring. It proclaimed that everyone, the hero included, was as crooked as the outlaw he condemned. It was the reflection of the 1970s disillusionment, the period when America was questioning not only its authorities, but also its morals. The movie thus became a mirror, reflecting the very contradictions of society. Then there was this very peculiar and almost playful tone. Mankiewicz integrated dark comedy into the movie as a kind of therapeutic measure to help the audience bear the harsh truth. The outcome was a Western that poked fun at its own absurdities while, at the same time, gradually and very quietly, destructively exposing the whole genre. No victory here, no triumph at all, just a very sore point, noticing that in this world even the best of intentions get distorted. Nevertheless, to the irony and dirt, one subplot was remarkable, not for its depth, but for its daringness. It was about Barbara Rhoades, who was playing a seemingly naive schoolteacher called Miss Jessie Brundage, who goes to the prison for charity and eventually becomes part of the riot. The character was supposed to have a very short life, and she was intended as comic relief, the repressed lady at a loss in a pile of thieves. But what transpired during the shooting made that scene not only great, but also something the studio would wish the public never knew. It was meant to be a light moment. It turned out to be notorious. Because while Mankiewicz was busy breaking the rules of storytelling, Barbara Rhoades was about to break every other rule Hollywood still clung to. And one shocking scene would ensure that there was a crooked man was never seen the same way again. The scene that crossed the line. For most of her early career, Barbara Rhoades was known for her charisma, comic timing, and the glint of confidence that set her apart from the crowd. By the late 1960s, she had become a familiar face in television westerns and light comedies, charming, witty, and self-assured. But when she signed on to play Miss Jessie Brundage in There Was a Crooked Man, she had no idea that her most talked-about role would be one the public never actually saw. On paper, Miss Jessie was the perfect caricature, a prim, proper Victorian schoolteacher whose moral compass was as rigid as her corset. Her brief appearance was designed to add levity to the film's darker themes, a touch of naive innocence amid the chaos of hardened criminals. But what began as a moment of comic relief would evolve, on the day of filming, into one of the most controversial sequences ever shot for a major studio western. The scene took place during the movie's chaotic prison riot, a sequence that sent inmates, guards, and visitors scrambling in every direction as violence erupted around them. According to the script, Miss Jessie was supposed to panic, stumble, and flee as her prim attire slowly came undone, a metaphorical stripping away of propriety in a world ruled by moral decay. But director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, famous for his perfectionism and boldness, had a different vision. As Rhoades later recalled in interviews, Mankiewicz pulled her aside before filming and told her, "This scene isn't about comedy anymore. It's about freedom." He wanted chaos, absurdity, and exposure, literal and metaphorical. "Don't think about modesty," he told her. "Think about fear." What followed was one continuous take. The riot in full motion, dust swirling through the air, Rhoades running in terror as the camera followed. One by one, her clothes disappeared. First the gloves, then the shawl, then the bodice. When the shot was finished, Rhoades was not only nude, but also running through the desert. And the character's sophisticated mask was entirely removed. The crew stood still in shock. After that, a hand applause. The incident was raw, wild, and astonishing. However, as per the onlookers, it was somehow, ironically, poetic. It was the perfect embodiment of the film's themes. Manners dropped, the human face torn off under disorder. The footage without cuts was kept in a vault, out of sight for the public. But the tale continued to circulate. There were whispers about the lost scene, different versions of what Mankiewicz had filmed, Rhodes's acting skill, and the beautiful pictures that nobody would ever get to see. Years later, two pictures, one of the actress without a top and one of her fully nude, were leaked, thus proving that indeed the scene had been shot. Rhoades was the one who dealt with the whole matter and controversy very professionally. In later interviews, she laughed it off, saying she had simply done her job, that she was not ashamed but surprised by the reaction. Nevertheless, she confessed that the situation taught her a little something about Hollywood. It was okay to tease with public outrage as long as you didn't actually let it happen. But what Warner Brothers saw as a scandal, Mankiewicz considered essential, and he fought to keep it in. Applause on set. Panic in Burbank. When filming began on that now mythic day in the desert, no one could have predicted that There Was a Crooked Man would make Hollywood history, not for its performances or plot, but for a single moment never meant to survive the edit room. The script called for a chaotic prison riot. Extras were prepped, cameras loaded, and 100 moving parts had to align to capture Joseph L. Mankiewicz's vision of total anarchy. But one instruction, whispered just before the cameras rolled, was meant only for Barbara Rhoades. "Run until there's nothing left," Mankiewicz told her. "No costume, no control, no shame, just the truth." It was a daring request, even for the late 1960s, when Hollywood was testing the boundaries of the new MPAA rating system. Rhoades had been told her costume might tear during the chaos, but no one, not even the assistant director, knew how far Mankiewicz planned to go. That morning, the cast and crew assembled under the blistering sun at Joshua Tree National Park, the real backdrop for the film's desert prison. Dozens of extras in tattered uniforms waited amid swirling dust. Rhoades, buttoned tightly into a prim Victorian gown, stood at the edge of the set, awaiting her cue. There were no intimacy coordinators, no closed sets for sensitive scenes, just trust, instinct, and a touch of madness. When the signal came, chaos erupted. Smoke bombs exploded, extras shouted, and mock violence filled the air. Through that turmoil ran Barbara Rhoades, sprinting, stumbling, ripping through the dust as the camera followed in one long, unbroken take. As she moved, her dress tore away piece by piece. The corset loosened, the layers fell, and by the end, she was running naked across the dunes, framed by the blinding desert sun. The reaction was immediate. For a moment, silence. Then the crew began to applaud. According to reports, Harry Stradling Jr., the cinematographer, claimed it to be one of the most ghostly images he had ever taken. A lady once representing elegance, now naked of the madness around her. But in Burbank, the admiration was replaced by panic. The moment the footage got to Warner Brothers, the executives demanded to see it. Before long, they had come to a decision. The whole part would be cut. It was too graphic and too much risk. "A Western is what we are selling," one executive declared bluntly. Not a scandal. For Barbara Rhoades, it was a moment that defined and haunted her at the same time. During the shooting, she showed no fear and trusted Mankiewicz's vision completely. Later, she was confronted with the ever-present Hollywood double standard, a surrounding area that, in women's courage, but then wiped it out of the picture. However, Rhoades was not expressing any regret. "It was nothing but chaos," she would say later on, still laughing. But that was the whole point. Things were falling apart. My costume included. The technical people saw it as the most truthful scene of the film. The company termed it a risk. And in the midst, a part of movie history faded away into the safe. But the story didn't end there, because Mankiewicz refused to let the studio's scissors define his film. The fight over that missing footage would expose just how fragile a director's power really was in the final days of Hollywood's old guard. The heart cut out. When Warner Brothers screened the first full cut of There Was a Crooked Man, executives expected a sharp, provocative Western, daring perhaps, but marketable. What they saw instead left them stunned. The room went silent as Joseph L. Mankiewicz's 2-hour and 45-minute version unfolded, an ironic, unsettling portrait of greed and moral decay, capped by the now legendary riot scene featuring Barbara Rhoades. Mankiewicz had gone all in, intellectually, visually, thematically. He hadn't made a Western about justice. He'd made a dark comedy about corruption. To Warner Brothers, it wasn't bold. It was dangerous. The executives' notes were brutal. The film was too long, too strange, too explicit. They feared audiences wouldn't know whether to laugh, cringe, or leave. And when it came to Rhoades's uncut scene, the verdict was swift. Remove it entirely. The sequence, they warned, could earn the film an X rating. Commercial death in 1970. Mankiewicz insisted the nudity wasn't gratuitous, but symbolic, an image of moral collapse amid chaos. The studio didn't care. Symbolism didn't sell tickets. Mankiewicz fought hard. He'd weathered plenty of studio interference, from Cleopatra's chaos to the battles over All About Eve. But this loss felt personal. He believed the Rhoades sequence, along with other trimmed subplots, gave the film its bite, its cynicism, its edge. Cutting them, he said, dulled its purpose. After weeks of argument, Warner Brothers prevailed. The final release ran just over 2 hours, with roughly 45 minutes gone. Entire character arcs, transitions, and the infamous Rhoades moment. The wit and intelligence remained, but something essential was missing. Critics sensed it. The New York Times called it an intelligent Western that seems afraid of its own brilliance. The studio justified the alterations as a matter of business. They required a Christmas premiere, a rating suitable for children, and a shorter runtime to accommodate more showings each day. The Mankiewicz version, they argued, was too dismal for the time of year. The cast and crew felt it was a betrayal. The director of photography, Harry Stradling Jr., bemoaned, "They excised its very core completely." Complicated was the aftermath for Barbara Rhoades. The scene that was never shown became the center of rumor and intrigue. Playboy was quick to offer her a pictorial based on the lost footage. She politely turned it down, saying she would rather leave something to the imagination. This restraint only added to her myth. Fans and reporters started calling her the actress who broke the code, the lady whose silent protest outlasted the movie that gagged her. Over the years, the story of the Crooked Man has found an afterlife as a cult object, and at the same time as a cautionary tale. What might have certainly been Mankiewicz's boldest statement turned out to be one of his most controversial. Critics applauded its smartness, but criticized its inconsistencies. The director later confessed his dissatisfaction. The film was to mock hypocrisy, he stated, but instead, it became a hypocrite's victim. Very soon, the missing scene became even more than just a scene. It gained an aura of myth. The collectors were whispering about private films. The archivists were looking for the lost negatives. 2 production stills were discovered in the 1990s. One was topless, and the other was full body. But the entire scene has never come back. Maybe that mystery is the reason why it is still talked about. Because even after the scissors came down, the story of Barbara Rhoades refused to fade. And the missing footage would soon spark new questions about who truly owned the art. The director who created it, or the studio that buried it. From scandal to symbol, When There Was a Crooked Man finally reached theaters on December 25, 1970, it arrived as a shell of the film Joseph L. Mankiewicz had envisioned. The Christmas release was ironic. The movie was anything but festive. Instead of a classic Western about justice and redemption, audiences got a darkly comic tale of greed and hypocrisy. Critics were split. Some hailed it as one of the smartest Westerns ever made. Others dismissed it as cold and uneven. Yet few realized how much had been cut, or that the most talked about scene was one they'd never see. Long before the premiere, rumors of a deleted Barbara Rhoades sequence had already spread. Crew members whispered about the lost reel, while gossip columns hinted Warner Brothers was hiding something scandalous. Soon, that rumor eclipsed the film itself. Viewers expecting a straightforward Western were puzzled by its moral grayness, while others, curious about its rumored boldness, wondered what the studio had censored. What no one doubted was that curiosity about Rhodes's missing scene was spreading faster than ticket sales. Rhoades handled the speculation with quiet grace. Where another actress might have distanced herself, she faced it with humor. "I did what I was asked," she later said. "The camera rolled, I ran, and the desert was cold." That's all there is to it. Her calm, good-natured tone disarmed reporters and shaped her image as both fearless and professional. She wasn't shocked by what she'd done, only by how shocked everyone else seemed to be. Hollywood, on the other hand, had no idea what to do with her. Warner Brothers publicity completely neglected her and centered its attention on the stars Kirk Douglas and Henry Fonda. The campaign barely mentioned her, even though her invisible interaction gradually became the movie's biggest mystery and the talk of the town. The bitterness of the irony was that the actress who gave one of the boldest performances was completely wiped off from the promotional activities of the movie. When nobody was watching, the clipped scenes created a buzz. Confirming authorities reported that the footage had been locked up in a secret Warner Brothers vault in early 1971. Then the stories began to grow in number. It was either lost, destroyed, or even stolen. By the early 1990s, 2 promotional stills were uncovered, one featuring Rhoades topless and in movement, while the other showed her completely nude, but the image was blurred by her movement. The pictures once again gave rise to the interest in the missing footage, and the film historians named it the Crooked Cut. Meanwhile, the Crooked Man, who was a bit of a cliché, has come to be regarded as a cult classic, though quietly at first. In the 80s, revisionist Western scholars found it again, and they were very impressed by its humor and moral complexity. The younger generation, attracted to the rumor of the sinful scene, found more than just a scandal. They found a performer, a novel, cynical satire disguised as a Western, where virtue was an illusion and everyone was crooked. Rhoades was steady in her film and television work, not letting the legend around her bother her. She didn't go looking for the missing reel, nor did she ever ask for acknowledgement. Her silence became part of the film's mystique. Even today, no version of the entire uncut scene has come out, and perhaps that's the reason it lives on. It is both an artifact and a myth, and it remains a ghost of a Hollywood that was daring enough to shoot and timid enough to conceal the film. But time has a way of reshaping legacies, and what was once censored as scandal has since been reinterpreted as courage. In the years that followed, the missing reel became more than a rumor. It became a symbol of everything there was a crooked man was trying to see. The Crooked Legacy begins. Decades after its release, There Was a Crooked Man still refuses to fade into film history. It lives somewhere between masterpiece and misfire, beloved by some, dismissed by others, and haunted by the ghost of the footage no one ever saw. That feels appropriate. Crooked Man was never about neat endings or moral clarity. It was about imperfection, deception, and the uneasy truth that the real story often lies in what's missing. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, critics began re-evaluating the film amid shifting views on censorship and sexuality. What had once been too daring now seemed tame beside Hollywood's new freedoms. Historians came to see Crooked Man as a casualty of its era, a film punished not for obscenity, but for honesty about hypocrisy. That reassessment shed new light on Barbara Rhoades' lost scene. What the studio considered a liability, later audiences recognized as bold and subversive. Rhoades never fueled the myth herself. In interviews, she recalled the production with warmth, not bitterness. "It was a wild day," she said. "We were shooting chaos, and for a few minutes, that's exactly what it was. Chaos everywhere." She didn't see herself as a rebel or a feminist icon, yet history made her one. Her confidence, humor, and professionalism in a male-dominated industry turned her into a quiet pioneer. Film scholars now place Rhoades alongside Jane Fonda and Raquel Welch, women navigating the collision between sexuality and power during Hollywood's cultural upheaval. But unlike those who turned controversy into celebrity, Rhoades walked away gracefully. Her disappearance only deepened the mystery. She had, in a sense, shown everything, and then left without explanation. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who passed away in 1993, never got to see the restoration of his complete version. Throughout his life, he cursed the studio for its meddling. "The story was never about cowboys," he stated. "It was about people pretending to be good." The quote suggests a funeral oration for both the film and the cautious old Hollywood that stifled creativity with fear. Today, There Was a Crooked Man is a movie that comes across as an iconoclast in the saga of cinema. It is evaluated for portraying the changing ideas in the Western genre. It is liked for its witty dialogues, and it is simply remembered for its ambition. The missing Rhoades sequence, still a mystery, continues to polarize the audience with its presence. Was the missing part a moral cut, or was it done to safeguard reputations and profits? There are lots of theories, but proof is still hard to come by. In a sense, the theme of crookedness that the film presented became a part of its own history, ironically. Barbara Rhoades' lost moment might never come back. However, its ghost is still there, in the topics of art, freedom, censorship, and the unnoticed powers that determine a film's fate. So, what do you think? Was Barbara Rhoades' lost scene too bold for its time, or the masterpiece moment that could have changed movie history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed uncovering this story from Hollywood's hidden vault, make sure to like, subscribe, and watch the next video on your screen, where we dig into more untold moments from the golden age of film.